Can we look at our second reading for today, please? And that is taken from Genesis. So this is after the flood, and when God made a covenant with Noah and his children. Okay, all right, so reading from Genesis 9, starting from verse 1. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on the beasts of the earth and on all the birds in the sky, on every creature that moves along the ground and all the fish in the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you green plants, I give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. And for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting for every animal and from every human being too. I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God, God has made mankind. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it." Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock and all the wild animals, all that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you. I have set a rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures and every kind on the earth." So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth." Now, we're actually continuing with a short series on the resurrection. And I wanted to talk to you a bit more about the resurrection today. And you might be looking at these verses that Damiano and I read and wonder, what does this have to do with the resurrection? But I'm wanting to reflect on something that's very important for us to understand and something that is significant for us if we want to understand the world that we're in. Now, this last week, I watched a series on Waco, Texas. Americans in the room will know what that means. A lot of people my age will know what that means. But for many of you, you'll have no clue. So Waco, Texas was a situation going back to the early 1990s when there was a community of Christians, although it was a cult, it was a Christian cult, who were living in this large compound. And there was all these families and children living together. And in this compound, they had started to accumulate a lot of weapons. And the government authorities were concerned about this. So they armed themselves up and they sent in tactical people to arrest them. And there was a shootout. And a number of officers got killed. And then there was a 50-day siege of the compound with the federal FBI and the ATF and all of the government forces marshalled around them, and they were waiting for them to surrender, and they were negotiating all sorts of things. In the end, a number of people got out, a number of children came out with their mothers and things like that. But at the end, there was a fire that started in the compound. And it wiped out everybody remaining in the compound. And there were some 80 men, women and children killed in that compound. 80 men, women and children. So it was a great tragedy, and people are still asking questions about it today. But the reason why I'm telling you this story was because after all this happened, one of the federal officers said in this video, he said, "I don't know how God could let this happen. I don't know how God could let this happen." And we often hear this, and it's a question of authority. Did God cause that to happen? Did God allow that to happen? Did God orchestrate those events? Why, when humans do so many things to bring about a terrible situation, why then do we turn and pass the authority back to God? It's a legitimate question, because we as Christians believe that God is sovereign. We believe that he has control of the heavens and the earth. But having control of the heavens and the earth does not necessarily mean that he is going to be making everything happen that is taking place. We know that God has authority to judge, and he does judge. But he doesn't necessarily judge the way we might think. So I wanted to start with this passage in Genesis to help us understand something that changed in the world, so that we can understand why actually evil can prosper so easily on this planet. Because I think it's a very important thing to notice. So what we notice there, and this eventually ties in, believe it or not, with the resurrection. We'll get there. So we all do remember this story of the flood, and I just read to you the conclusion of it, where God made the covenant with the humans and all the living creatures. Before the flood came, in Genesis 6, God said this, in Genesis 6:5, he said, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." Okay, so the humans had gotten terrible. Now, you imagine when humans get terrible, there'll be some who aren't, There might be a 10-year-old boy or a 15-year-old girl or a sweet mother somewhere just baking her scones, and they're not at capacity violence and everything. But generally, the society had totally broken down. And then, again in Genesis 6, God said, "Now the earth was corrupt." The writer, Moses said, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence." Full of violence. This is what precipitated the flood. And then God told Noah to create the ark for himself, his family, and the representative animals. They went on to be preserved because God was going to universally destroy the creatures on the planet and all the humans with them. Now, that's a severe judgment, a great judgment, and what we could say was the first human judgment, the first real human judgment. Prior to this, there hadn't been any judgment by God. Even, you remember earlier on in the story when Cain killed his brother Abel, and God was entitled, of course, to take Cain's life. And Cain was worried that if he'd be sent from the land, that people would take his life. And God said, "No, I'll put a mark upon him so that nobody will touch him." So God actually preserved even Cain, who was worthy of the death penalty. Okay, he was worthy of death, but God didn't implement it. So at that point, God had not brought any kind of judgment. Then suddenly with the flood, you have this universal judgment, this massive judgment. Now, that's all very devastating and alarming for us. So after the judgment, God reset the planet, if you like. He made it new so that this would not happen again. Now, we know that he committed himself to no longer destroying the whole planet. Okay, so he committed himself for the rest of time, he would not destroy the planet until the very end, until there's a final judgment day. But how then will humans be judged? How will humans be judged by God? If God is not bringing a universal judgment, is he going to stand in judgment of people who sin? So, for instance, if somebody sins, will they just drop dead? If somebody robs a bank, will they die at the threshold of the bank when they run out? Is this what God is going to do? Is he going to judge individuals? No. We have to read what the covenant says because it's so critically important. Let's turn again to that passage in Genesis 9, and I'm just going to reflect on this once again. So in Genesis 9, 5 and 6, he says this, "And for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal and from each human being too. I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For the image of God has God made mankind." So you see what's happened there. God at that point had not endorsed, commanded, or in any way implicitly approved of death, even upon animals. Animals at that point there's no indication that God wanted animals killed. But after the flood, he said to the humans, "I now give you the animals to you for food." Okay? So now the humans can kill the animals. But not only that, and this is the bigger thing, he has now apportioned judgment amongst humans to humans. You see, there's been a transfer. So if God is going to judge, you see it in the Bible. When God brings a judgment, it's hard to avoid it. If God brings a plague, everybody suffers. If God brings an earthquake, everybody suffers. The good, the bad, everybody. The children, the parents, the innocent, the guilty, everybody suffers. So when God brings disaster or judgment, it's a kind of a universal thing. So how can God now commit himself to not bringing judgment? The only way he could do it, in a sense, or the way we have it, is by appointing that judgment to human beings. So from that point on, humans were given the task of judgment. If they didn't judge, people would be unjudged. And God required, this will be very controversial for a lot of us, but God actually said, whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human their blood should be shed. Right? Basically death penalty. So you have God saying, you have to now judge the perpetrator. Humans are given authority to judge. He's now giving humans authority to be the judge of the planet. And so they are intended to do this. I'm not talking about vigilante, where every one of us becomes like Clint Eastwood or something, who looks very much like Paul, you might have noticed. And he going around killing everybody who doesn't cooperate with us. No, but that we would form societies, and those societies would appoint judges, and those judges would determine what is good for a society and what is not, and what is dangerous for a society, and how to withdraw criminals. And many societies have gone for incarceration to withdraw humans from civilization. Others embrace death penalty, whatever. But societies, to be ordered, they had to impose their own justice, because God was no longer going to do it. And if he did it, we wouldn't like what he would do. Because if God is going to impose justice, the innocent will get swept up with the guilty. All right? Or otherwise, God would have to just target every sinner and say, drop dead, you've crossed the line. You know, how did Adolf Hitler go all those years? How did the Third Reich go on all those years? That's the classic one. But you can look at this from any perspective. And people always ask the same question. How did God let this happen? Where was God during the Holocaust? Where was God in Rwanda when you had a genocide? Where was God in Cambodia when 4 million people were killed because they wore glasses? You know, in Cambodia, Pol Pot, a communist, he decided to get rid of the intellectual class. You know how he knew the intellectual class were? Glasses. So anybody who had glasses was executed. And there's actually provision in Cambodia now where you could see mountains of glasses because that's what happened. You see? So you get these people and you say, well, where's God? Why didn't God step in? Why didn't God just deal with his individual? And God could say to us, haven't you read the Bible? I've appointed judgment to humans. Humans are supposed to enforce judgment. Humans are supposed to do it. Don't come to me saying, where were you? Humans have a responsibility to judge the earth. Now, in saying this, you might think, well, doesn't this contradict what we think, that God is in control of everything, every molecule that moves through the atmosphere? Well, yes, he is. To the extent that he could say to Christians that whatever may happen to us, that he will make good. So all things that happen to us, even bad things, are for ultimately our good, because he can turn it into something good. You know, when Joseph, for instance, you know, in the Old Testament story, and he had 11 brothers, and they hated him, so they wanted to kill him. So one of them, they all wanted to kill him, but one of them, who was a bit more business-minded, said, let's not kill him, we can sell him. So they threw him in a hole, and sure enough, they got some money for Joseph, and he went to Egypt. And as the story unfolds, he became, if you like, the saviour of the whole world. Because through his actions, there was food for everybody from Pharaoh's empire that Joseph implemented, you see. Now, the question is, did God make these things happen? Did God make those men do those evil things? No, he didn't. But God used it for good. You see, you don't have to say God made it happen. But this doesn't in any way deny that Jesus Christ is Lord. You may hear this and say, but I thought we've been talking about, and Hope was talking about it, and Damiano was talking about it, everyone's talking about Jesus Christ being Lord. Doesn't being Lord mean exercising total control? I don't think it does. I think what it does mean is that everything is accountable to him, ultimately, and that everything is brought before his judgment seat. Everything will be judged by Jesus. He is the Lord of all, and there's no escaping his judgment. You know, now I'm saying a lot of stuff that for some of you might be new, for some of you might not be new, and nothing is ever as simple as what somebody can say in 10 minutes, all right? But generally speaking, that's the pattern we have. Humans have responsibility to judge things on the planet, you know, and if we don't judge, we can't then go crying to God and say, why aren't you judging this? When he has actually, through that covenant with Noah, gave the administration of the planet to humans. So that's the first point I wanted to make, that justice on this planet is given to humans, which means if you get a good judge, you're going to have a very nice country. If you've got a society where the leaders are doing the right things, you're going to have a very good society. You know, there are countries in the world, to give you an example of one, the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa, Central Africa, right? Resource-wise, it's one of the richest countries in the world. It's got what everybody wants right now, cobalt. Cobalt is the metal that is driving the electric car. Everything battery has to do with cobalt. They have 80% of the world's supply. 80%. Now that can be farmed, that can be dug out of the ground by a noble government, which could then build schools, build railways, build a better society for everybody. But you see, that doesn't necessarily happen. It remains poor and exploited. And most of that cobalt is actually, you'll read about it occasionally, being taken out of the ground through child labour. It's disgraceful. And it ends up in your IBM computers and your smartphones and all this sort of thing. And nobody wants to talk about it. But at the head of the river of all that technology, most of it is coming from the Congo through really ugly work practices. I'm not wanting to make this a message about social action or anything like that, but just to make a point that there are resources in the planet, and if the leaders are not wise, if the leaders aren't sensible, if the leaders don't judge right, the whole population will suffer. If the leaders make wrong judgments, that's why it's important to have good leaders. And if you have a noble leader who appoints noble judges, you are a very happy person. You live in a very happy society. Unfortunately, a lot of us are losing that kind of confidence in our societies. But that's the reality. Humans now have the authority to judge, and when there are righteous judges, righteousness will be implemented, and when there are evil judges, unrighteousness will be implemented. And that's also the story of Israel. You notice when Israel has a good king, everything prospers. Everybody's blessed. Everybody can live at peace with their neighbours. Then you get an evil king, everything goes to hell. You know, it's always determined on the nature of the judges. So, what on earth has this got to do with Jesus and his resurrection? Because this is what I've been talking about and wanting to reflect on a little bit more. Jesus, in fact, as you know, became a human being. And you may think, well, why did Jesus become a human being? It's a pretty basic question. Why did Jesus have to become a human being? Because in Genesis 9, God said that humans will be judged by humans. Right? So ultimately, if you want to have a righteous judge, that righteous judge has to be fully human. We're not going to be judged by angels. God has not even appointed it to himself. He's appointed it to his Son. And in order to get to that place, he had to be made human. You see? And so Jesus became human and essentially became God's agent. So this is where Damiano's reading came into play. Because when God appoints his Son, we often hear that word, Jesus is the Son of God. And for most of us, saying that Jesus is the Son of God simply means that he is the eternally begotten Son of God. Full stop. But the Bible uses it in two ways. Jesus is the eternally begotten Son of God, no doubt. Okay? He's always existed. He's always been in the bosom of the Father. He's always been in that relationship with the Father. And he was given to us. But when the Bible talks about becoming the Son of God, it means becoming authority. So when Jesus, for instance, was at his baptism and God declared, "This is my Son in whom I am pleased," he wasn't declaring the eternal identity of Jesus. He was declaring the authority that he now had. the authority he now had to judge on the earth. You see? And the same as the Hebrews text. In Hebrews chapter 5, what Damiano read, he says, Christ did not exalt himself to become a high priest, but was appointed by God when God said to him, "You are my son, today I have become your father." So when God said to Jesus, "Today I have become your father," he's not talking about his eternal nature, but he's talking about his eternal authority. So through the resurrection, that's what takes place. So if we look at, for instance, in Romans chapter 1, and I'll read that for us. If you have a quick look at Romans chapter 1, and we'll just read verses 1 to 4. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle and set apart for the gospel of God, the gospel he promised beforehand through his prophets and through the Holy Scriptures, regarding his Son, who, as to his earthly identity, was a descendant of David, and who, through the Spirit of holiness, was appointed the Son of God in power by his resurrection from the dead. You see, so the resurrection of Jesus is instrumental in God establishing a priest or a leader of humans who cannot die. Jesus then becomes the eternal priest through the resurrection. Those who studied Hebrews with me last year, we spent a lot of time considering this. But the point being that the resurrection was critical to establish Jesus' permanent priesthood, permanent authority. And that's why we can say that in the end, that every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. In another place, Paul says, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what was done in the body, whether good or evil. You see, so Jesus, when God makes him Lord, he becomes the human who is indestructible, which fulfills the covenant with Noah, means that now a human being can judge the humans, and he remains the judge of all the world. Aren't you glad that another person didn't become judge of all the world, an evil one? Isn't it wonderful to know that we have a judge who is righteous and good, who will judge fairly and squarely, who will right the wrongs, bring justice to pass, that we'll all be satisfied? Do you know, excuse me, I'm going to have a glass of water. Maybe women are different. But looking at movies, what Hollywood produces, the TV shows, I see a lot of justice stuff. You know, when you talk about Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood, and all of these, have you noticed this sort of stuff? And people say, why do they have so much mindless violence? People just want to see people get killed, bang, 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 bang. No, they don't. I don't know many people who just want to see a bunch of babies shot. Sorry, babies. Or a group of innocent milkmaids shot. Nobody gets pleasure from that. You know who they want to see get shot? The very evil guy. And that's why all of these movies have to have a real evil person that you have to hate and feel like he deserves death. And then the celebration point of the movie is when the hero kills the evil one. Right? Why is that genre so popular? Why is it so popular? Because we all crave justice. I'm speaking for men, I know all men like this. Maybe women hate it, but it seems to me that there's a lot of a market out there for that. There's a lot of appetite for it. And it's not because people just want to see random bloodshed. It's because people want justice. And so the appointment of Jesus to be the eternal judge, the one before whom all of us stands, should bring us great joy. He is overseeing everything. Everything is answerable to him. He is Lord of all. But he doesn't orchestrate it, but he will judge it. So let's be clear about that. I mentioned that this whole thing is really about the resurrection ultimately, because it's through the resurrection that Jesus becomes that eternal priest, something we don't often think about. But we need to reflect on this too, because it's something I dwelt a little bit on last week when we were thinking about evangelism, and a number of went out and did some great work doing evangelism this week. It's fantastic. But our primary message is that Jesus Christ is Lord. And you'll remember this from Matthew. Jesus, when he met his disciples in Galilee, he said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. A human being has all authority? Those of you who know your Old Testament, maybe from Daniel 7, you'll see that there's this vision of one like a son of man approaching the Ancient of Days. And there are the four beasts there, and he approaches, and this one like the Son of Man is given all authority. That's who Jesus is. That's why he refers to himself as the Son of Man. This morning, I'm not sure if it was you, Damiano, or Patrick. You both read John, but you read the blind man. Yeah. So in the blind man, Jesus doesn't say, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Why Son of Man? Because in Daniel, it's one like the Son of Man who is given all authority. You see, he understood that there was going to be a man that is going to be given all authority, and Jesus is the man. Jesus is the man. He is the man, and the moment of his authority comes through his resurrection from the dead. And I think if we can understand this, it gives us a better handle on the planet, on our understanding of suffering and evil. And we're not constantly perplexed. Why did the Waco compound, why did God do this? God didn't do it. Stupid decisions did it. People made bad decisions on both sides. It was just people living selfishly, resulting in terrible things. But God will judge every action that happened there. You see? I'm not trying to get God off the hook or say it's Satan who does all this stuff and that there's this cosmic battle and Satan gets it over God. No, it's none of that. God has apportioned the suffering on the earth to humans, or the judgment to humans. And if they don't execute it wisely, it will go rampant. So I just wanted to get those thoughts through to you because I think it's very important for us to be informed about the planet upon which we live and how God engages with it, so that we're not pointing the finger at the wrong place when things go bad. Let us pray.